You know that feeling? First thing in the morning, or maybe that afternoon, pick me up.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are coffee's involved somewhere.
Absolutely. It's hard to imagine life without it sometimes.
Right. But there's so much more to it than just, the caffeine kick. It's this whole world inside the bean.
Totally. And that's what we're doing today, right? A real deep dive.
Exactly. For everyone listening who's curious, we're gonna brew up the essentials. No jargon, just the good stuff.
Consider it your personal coffee primer. We'll trace the beans' journey.
From the very beginning.
Yeah, origins, the main types of beans, how they get processed, roasting,
Ooh, roasting is key.
definitely. And caffeine versus decaf, whole bean or ground, all that stuff. Plus brewing methods and, of course, decoding those cafe menus.
Perfect. Okay, let's start at square one. Where did this stuff even come from?
Well, the story you usually hear, the popular one anyway, it takes us to Ethiopia,
Ethiopia, yeah. Around 700 AD.
something like that. And there's this legend about a goat herder named Kaldi.
Ah, Coldy and the Dancing Goats.
Exactly. His goats supposedly got super energetic after eating these, like, bright red berries from a bush.
So he tried them too.
Legend says he did, felt buzzed, and boom, coffee discovered. It's a great story. Probably not strictly true, but fun.
Right, it sticks with you. But the actual proof of people drinking coffee, that comes later.
Yeah, much later, actually. While Ethiopia is, the birthplace of the Arabica bean itself,
Mm-hmm.
the first solid evidence of coffee consumption pops up in Yemen around the 15th century.
Yum. Okay, interesting. How are they using it?
This is pretty cool. It seems it was particularly popular in Sufi monasteries.
Really? Why there?
They used it to stay awake and focus during long nights of prayer and meditation. It wasn't just casual drinking. It had a spiritual, practical purpose.
Wow, okay, so not just for chatting. How did it spread from Yemen?
Well, from there it started moving. Mecca by the 15th century,
Okay.
then into the Levant, places like Syria,
Huh.
Egypt, early 16th century.
Is it immediately popular?
Not always. Actually, when it first arrived in places like Cairo and Mecca, there was some controversy.
Controversy about coffee.
Yeah, debates about whether it was, like, intoxicating or permissible under religious law. Bit wild to think about now.
Huh. Who knew? So how did it jump over to Europe?
Trade routes, mainly,
Hmm.
through the Mediterranean. It landed in Italy, probably Venice, in the second half of the 16th century.
And then it took off?
Pretty much. Coffee houses started popping up. Holland, England, France, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
By the late 17th century, they were everywhere.
And these weren't just places to get a drink, right?
No, not at all. They became huge social centers, places for news, political debate, business deals.
Yeah.
Intellectuals hung out there, kind of like the internet cafes of their day,
Yeah, totally. Hubs of activity. And then it went global.
Oh, yeah. A really key moment was in 1720. This French guy, Gabriel Declue,
I think I've heard this name.
he managed, against some odds, to get a coffee seedling to Martinique in the Caribbean.
Just one.
Well, maybe a few, but the story focuses on one precious plant. And from that, coffee cultivation spread like crazy through the Caribbean and Latin America.
Amazing.
By 1788, Saint-Domingue, that's 80, now was supplying about half the world's coffee.
Half the world's coffee from that region. Incredible. What about the big players today? Brazil?
Yep, Brazil was already becoming a powerhouse.
Yeah.
By 1852, they were the largest producer in the world.
And they still are, right?
They still are. But others came up too, of course. Colombia, Ivory Coast, Ethiopia itself is still huge, and Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Yeah, they became the second largest producer in 1999, mainly growing Robusta. So the map of coffee production is really global now.
It's quite a journey for a humble being. Even the word coffee has a history, doesn't it?
It does. It traveled too. Our word coffee comes from the Dutch coffee,
Okay.
which came from the Ottoman Turkish kav,
Uh-huh.
which came from the Arabic kawa.
Kowa. What did that originally mean?
Well, there was some early thought it might have meant wine, because, dark drink, stimulating. But the most likely meaning is just dark, referring to the drink, or maybe the bean.
Makes sense.
And you still hear the Ethiopian term buna sometimes, connecting right back to the origin.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so history covered. Let's talk beans. We hear Arabica and Robusta all the time. What's the fundamental difference?
Right. Those are the two big species everyone grows commercially. Think of them as the main players.
Okay.
Robusta. Well, it's robust. It's easier to grow, higher yield, more caffeine.
More caffeine. Okay. Flavor-wise?
Often seen as less
For her.
refined. Can be more bitter, sometimes rubbery or earthy notes. But It produces fantastic crema.
Crema, that reddish foam on espresso.
Exactly. So you find Robusta in a lot of espresso blends for that visual appeal and that extra kick.
Gotcha. Power and crema from Robusta. What about Arabica?
Arabica is generally the premium one. It's harder to grow, more sensitive.
But the flavor payoff is there.
Usually, yeah, much wider range of flavors. Fruity, floral, chocolatey, nutty. More complex, more acidity, generally smoother.
And there are different types of Arabica, too.
Oh, tons. Varietals and cultivars, like different types of apples or grapes.
Yeah.
You hear names like bourbon, typica, geisha, caturra, pacamara, Ethiopian heirlooms.
Wow.
Each has slightly different characteristics, different potential flavors. It gets really deep if you want it to.
So Arabica for complexity and nuance, Robusta for punch and crema, generally speaking.
That's a good starting point, yeah.
Okay, beans are picked. Then comes processing. What's that all about?
Processing is basically getting the bean out of the coffee cherry, the fruit. How you do that massively affects the final taste.
Right, because the bean is inside that fruit. What's the, oldest way?
Probably the dry or natural process, simple concept.
Mm-hmm.
You just spread the whole cherries out in the sun to dry.
The whole fruit.
Yep, on patios, raised beds, whatever. Takes weeks. The bean dries inside the fruit, absorbing sugars and compounds.
What does that do to the taste?
Gives you those really fruity, sometimes winey or fermented notes. Big body, often lower acidity. Think blueberry, strawberry vibes sometimes. Works best where it's dry and sunny.
Okay, sun-dried natural. What's the alternative?
The main alternative is the wet or washed process. Much more controlled.
How does that work?
Here, you remove the skin and pulp of the cherry pretty quickly after picking, usually with machines and water. Then the beans, still in their parchment layer, go into water tanks to ferment.
Ferment, like beer or wine?
Sort of. It's a controlled fermentation that breaks down the sticky layer, the mucilage, around the bean. Then they're washed clean and dried.
And the taste difference?
Generally cleaner, brighter flavors, more acidity shines through, more clarity. You often get more floral or citrus notes with washed coffees. But timing the fermentation is crucial. Too long, and you get funky off flavors.
So natural for fruity body, washed for clean bright. Is there an in-between?
There is, called the pulp natural, or more commonly now, the honey process.
Honey process. Does it involve honey?
No actual honey. It refers to the sticky mucilage left on the bean. You pulp the skin off like the washed process,
Okay.
but then you dry the bean with some or all of that sticky mucilage still attached. No fermentation tanks.
Ah, so it dries with the sticky stuff.
Exactly. Depending on how much mucilage is left, white honey, yellow, red, black honey indicate increasing amounts. You get different results.
Yeah.
Often a balanced sweetness and body like a natural, but cleaner than a typical natural. Good complexity.
Wow, okay. Natural washed honey. It really shows how much happens before roasting.
Absolutely. Processing is a huge flavor shaper.
All right, so we've got our green beans processed and ready. Now for the magic, roasting.
Yes. Roasting is where the potential flavor gets unlocked. Heat transforms the green bean.
How does it work, basically?
You apply heat, the beans tumble around, chemical reactions happen, sugars caramelize, acids change, oils develop. It's complex chemistry, but we usually talk about roast levels: light, medium, dark.
Let's start light. What defines a light roast?
Shortest roasting time. You stop the roast usually around or just after the first crack.
First crack? Like popcorn?
Kind of. It's an audible cracking sound as moisture escapes and the bean expands. Light roasts keep more of the bean's original character. The origin flavors, the acidity. Think brighter, more nuanced, sometimes floral or fruity. Less body.
So you really taste where the bean came from. What about medium?
Roasted a bit longer, past first crack but before the second crack. Sugars caramelize more. Acidity mellows, body increases, more balance.
What kind of flavors come out?
You start getting more nutty, caramel, chocolatey notes. Still retain some origin character, but the roast starts contributing more flavor. City roast is a common medium roast term.
City roast, okay.
Yeah, it's like a fully developed flavor, nice brown color, maybe a tiny bit of oil showing, but not much. Good balance.
Makes sense. And then the dark side.
Into the dark roast.
Yeah.
Roasting continues up to or past the second crack. Another usually quieter cracking sound.
What happens flavor-wise then?
A lot of the original sugars are heavily caramelized or even carbonized. The roast flavor dominates. Bold, smoky, bittersweet, sometimes burnt notes. The bean's origin gets masked.
And they look different too, right?
Oh yeah, very dark brown, often oily on the surface because the heat pushes the internal oils out. Think French roast, quite dark, oily, smoky, bittersweet.
And even darker.
Italian roast is often even darker, almost black, very oily, very low acidity, very bold, intense, roasty flavor.
So light for origin, medium for balance, dark for bold roastiness.
That's the general idea, yeah. Personal preference plays a huge role, obviously.
Definitely. Okay, let's switch gears slightly. Caffeine, the buzz. What's the real difference between regular and decaf?
Well, the obvious one. Decaf has had almost all the caffeine removed.
Almost all. Not completely caffeine-free.
By law, it needs to have at least 97% of the caffeine removed. So there's usually a tiny trace left, but not enough to give you a jolt.
How do they get the caffeine out? Seems tricky.
It happens to the green beans before roasting. There are a few main ways. Some use solvents like ethyl acetate, which could be derived naturally, or methylene chloride.
Solvents. Is that safe?
They're washed off or evaporate during roasting to negligible levels. Another way is using supercritical carbon dioxide, CO2, under pressure. Acts like a solvent.
Okay.
And then there's the Swiss water process that just uses water and charcoal filters. No chemicals involved, just solubility principles.
Swiss water sounds appealing. Does decaf taste different?
It can. The process, whichever one is used, can sometimes strip out some other flavor compounds along with the caffeine. So decaf might taste a little milder, maybe less aromatic. The bean color can change slightly too. But good decaf can be really delicious now.
Good to know. Nutritionally, are they similar?
Pretty much identical, apart from the caffeine content. Same antioxidants mostly.
Okay. Now, for brewing at home, big debate sometimes. Whole bean versus pre-ground.
Oh, whole bean. Almost always whole bean if you can.
I so strongly.
Freshness. Coffee starts losing its flavor and aroma compounds as soon as it's ground. Oxygen gets in, things oxidize.
Because there's more surface area.
Exactly. Think of an apple, cut it open, it browns way faster than a whole one. Same idea. Whole beans protect the good stuff inside for much longer.
And you grind it right before brewing.
That's the ideal. You get the maximum aroma, maximum flavor. Plus, you can actually see the quality of the beans you're buying.
What about pre-ground then? Just convenience?
Pretty much. It's convenient, no doubt, but you sacrifice a lot of flavor potential. And that staleness happens fast, even in a sealed bag. Plus, you're stuck with whatever grind size they chose.
Ah, grind size. That brings us to brewing methods. Coffee makers versus espresso machines. What's the core difference?
It really comes down to pressure, mostly, and how the water interacts with the coffee.
So regular drip coffee maker.
It's usually gravity doing the work. Hot water drips through ground coffee in a filter basket. Simple, common. We can call that drip.
Okay. And espresso.
Espresso machines use high pressure, like really high, around 9 bars, which is roughly 132 pounds per square inch.
Wow.
To force hot water through a tightly packed puck of finely ground coffee very quickly. That pressure extracts different compounds and creates that concentrated shot with crema. That's pressure brewing.
Got it. Drip versus pressure. What about things like French press?
That's steeping or immersion. You mix coarse grounds with hot water, let it sit for a few minutes, then plunge a filter down to separate the grounds.
And Turkish coffee.
That's boiling. Very fine grounds are boiled with water, often with sugar, in a special pot called an ibrik or a sieve.
So drip, pressure, steeping, boiling, lots of ways. And you mentioned grind size being important for pre-ground. It must matter here too.
Oh, absolutely critical. Each method needs a different grind size for best results.
Nice.
Espresso needs super fine, almost like powdered sugar. Drip usually needs a medium grind, like coarse sand. French press needs coarse, like breadcrumbs, so it doesn't get muddy or over-extract during the steep time. Turkish needs powder fine.
Using the wrong grind messes things up.
Totally. Too fine for your method, you'll over-extract bitter taste. Too coarse, you'll under-extract weak, sour coffee. Getting the grind right is huge.
Okay, grind size is key. Let's talk finished drinks. Espresso seems like the foundation for so many cafe drinks. What is a perfect espresso shot?
It's that small, concentrated coffee, right? Made with that high pressure. A good shot should have a balance of sweetness, acidity, and bitterness, a nice, rich aroma, and that layer of reddish-brown crema on top.
The crema again? What is that exactly?
It's basically tiny bubbles of CO2 gas emulsified with coffee oils. Looks good, adds texture, though its flavor contribution is debated. Getting a good shot needs the right grind, dose, temperature, pressure, time. It's a science and an art.
Okay, so that's the base. What's an Americano then?
Simple. Espresso diluted with hot water gives you a larger drink, closer in strength to drip coffee, but with that espresso flavor profile.
Easy enough. Macchiato. Sounds fancy.
Means marked or stained in Italian. A traditional one is just a shot of espresso marked with a tiny dollop of foamed milk.
Just a tiny bit.
Yeah, like 1 or 2 spoonfuls. Just to take the edge off the espresso intensity, add a touch of texture, not the big caramel things you sometimes see.
Right, the traditional way. Okay, moving up in milk. Cafe latte.
Latte means milk in Italian. So espresso mixed with a lot of steamed milk, topped with just a thin layer of foam. Very smooth, creamy, milk forward.
Lots of milk, thin foam. How's that different from a cappuccino? They seem similar.
The classic cappuccino is all about balance, equal thirds. 1 part espresso, 1 part steamed milk, and 1 part thick, airy foam on top.
Equal parts. That's the key. So more foam than a latte.
Definitely. A distinct, thicker cap of foam is the signature.
Got it. What about a flat white that's popped up everywhere?
That's like a cousin to the latte and cappuccino.
Yeah.
Usually uses espresso, often a double shot with steamed milk,
Yeah.
but the milk texture is key.
How?
It uses microfoam, very finely textured steamed milk with tiny, almost invisible bubbles. It's velvety, glossy, and integrates really smoothly with the espresso, allowing the coffee flavor to come through more strongly than in a typical latte.
Yeah.
Less voluminous foam than a cappuccino.
Thinner, velvety foam, stronger coffee taste than a latte. Makes sense. And finally, the mocha.
Ah, the treat. Basically a chocolate latte, espresso, chocolate syrup or powder, steamed milk,
And often whipped cream.
often topped with whipped cream. Yeah, coffee and chocolate, classic combo.
Definitely a good one. Wow, we've covered a ton of ground, from Ethiopian goats to microfoam.
We really have. It's a big world.
So if someone listening wants the key takeaways from all this, what should they remember?
I'd say first, appreciate the journey. Coffee has this incredibly rich history. Second, know your beans Arabica for nuance, Robusta for kick.
Uh-huh.
Third, processing matters. Natural, washed, honey create different tastes before roasting. Fourth, roast level drastically changes flavor. Light, medium, dark. Fifth, whole bean is usually best for freshness, and grind size must match your brewer. And finally, those cafe drinks. Most start with espresso and vary by milk amount and texture. Latte, cappuccino, flat white. Know the difference.
That's a great summary. So now hopefully everyone feels a bit more confident exploring.
Exactly. Use this as a jumping off point. Try a single origin Arabica, maybe a different roast than usual. Experiment with a French press or pour over if you usually use a drip machine.
Find your perfect cup.
That's the goal. It's all about discovering what you enjoy most.
And maybe a final thought to leave people with. Think about how this one beverage, with roots going back centuries, is still constantly evolving.
Yeah, from ancient rituals to global commodity to third wave artisanal shops.
Right. It shapes cultures, fuels economies, inspires creativity. What do you think the next chapter in coffee's story might look like? Something to ponder over your next brew.
Definitely. That's for diving in with us.